In Astonishing Spider-Man, they break the fourth wall by having Spidey meet the comic's writer, Scott Aukerman. They have this meta back and forth, and there comes a point where Spidey asks why he can't just settle down and be married, to which Aukerman responds that it's a touchy subject, but the long and short of it is that it would make for boring comics. This kind of attitude from Marvel has been a frustration from fans for quite a while now, but Marvel has a tendency to rub it in our faces like they're doing here. You see, Peter and Mary Jane were happily married for about 2 decades or so, until 2007's One More Day, which saw Peter make a Faustian deal to trade his marriage for the life of his Aunt May. This decision has remained controversial for almost 2 decades now, but Marvel has made their stance pretty clear. They don't care, instead opting to keep him single and mostly miserable, insisting that it would be boring otherwise, despite the fact that, again, there were 2 decades worth of stories where he and Mary Jane were married, and they're also together in the Ultimate run of the comics, with children, and that comic run is very well received, and ironically better received than Astonishing Spider-Man, where this comment is from. But Marvel's editorial has this weird attitude that insists that they cannot get back together, despite the fact that retcons are very common in comic books, and they can very easily undo One More Day. But apparently editorial insists that Peter being broke, unmarried, and miserable is somehow more relatable and interesting to readers, despite readers making it very clear that we don't support this, and the success of the Ultimate comics. But instead, Marvel just likes to rub it in, like what they're doing here in Astonishing Spider-Man, but also more egregious efforts, like introducing a character called Paul. Paul is a man from another universe who raises 2 children with Mary Jane after she gets trapped in that universe for several years. And honestly, this storyline just felt very spiteful. They knew fans were going to hate this, and they did it anyway. On the bright side, they did recently break up Paul and MJ, to many fans' celebration, but unfortunately that doesn't mean they're going to put MJ and Peter back together, despite the success they've had with that storyline in the past, and fans constantly saying that that's what they want to see. I don't know, the whole thing comes off as very counterintuitive and frankly mean-spirited. They're being really stubborn about it too. I mean, they know that they're leaving money on the table doing this, but it's like they have some kind of vendetta against this relationship. And maybe even against the fans at this point, and yet they still expect us to buy their books. Thanks, Marvel. But this whole situation got me thinking about how when it comes to romance, there's a lot of tropes that writers like to use that really grind my gears. So basically, I want to use this video as an excuse to complain about all the shipping and romance tropes that drive me up a wall. Before I get into it though, spoilers for all of these shows. I'd also like to give a disclaimer. If you enjoy any of the ships or tropes I talk about in this video, more power to you. Don't let me rain on your parade. This is all just my opinion and you're totally entitled to yours. So with that out of the way, let's get to the tropes. The first trope that drives me up a wall is will they, won't they won't, now stop complaining. This is basically jumping off from the Spider-Man and MJ thing. Now will they, won't they is arguably the most common romance trope, and it's not inherently bad. However, it can be really frustrating, especially when they drag it on for way too long and have a bunch of forced drama just to keep them apart. But in a nutshell, a piece of media will establish pretty early on that 2 characters are interested in each other romantically, only to have this whole song and dance of whether they will or will not end up together, even though it's pretty obvious they are supposed to be endgame. Couples like Danny and Sam from Danny Phantom, Aang and Katara from Avatar The Last Airbender, Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy from Spectacular Spider-Man, and usually the characters don't become an official couple until the finale of the show. Basically, writers are worried that people will be more invested in the lead up to their romance rather than the characters actually being together, because they worry that if the characters do have that big love confession or their first kiss or something, then people will become satisfied and then stop watching the show, because that confession is the payoff, rather than the characters actually being together as a couple. So if they save it for something like the finale, or at least very late into the show, then they won't have to worry about losing their audience. But I have several problems with this concept. First of all, I do like power couples, so it would be nice to actually see the couple part of that, and the characters officially dating. But also in the time it takes for the couple to finally get together, I kinda lose interest. On top of a lot of other tropes that bother me showing up in the meantime too, which I'll elaborate on later. But first I want to talk about the pacing issue. It just feels like they're dragging it on and on for the sake of drama to keep people invested, only for it to end up having the opposite effect. Case in point, Miraculous Ladybug, a show about a girl named Marinette who is a superhero called Ladybug. She has a crush on her classmate Adrian, who is secretly the superhero Cat Noir, who also happens to have a crush on Ladybug but just sees Marinette as a friend. Meanwhile, Marinette is not interested in Cat Noir that way, so they both have a crush on each other without realizing who the other person is. They then go on to spend 5 seasons jerking the audience around, both with if they'll get together as a couple and if they'll find out each other's secret identities. The writers constantly set back the progression in the story, whether it's erasing their memories or going back in time, just pulling out every trick in the book to keep this will they won't they going, way past its welcome. It got to the point that by the time they do finally get together in season 6, I was just kinda over the whole thing, which is ironic since that's basically the opposite of what the will they won't they trope is trying to accomplish. I personally prefer the way it was handled in the movie release, which saw them officially get together and know their secret identities by the end of it, instead of dragging it out for what ends up feeling like forced drama. Plus, I don't think that their antics were as cute or endearing as the show thought they were. Like, Marinette basically couldn't even hold a conversation with Adrian, constantly panicking and not being able to speak, along with her more stalkerish tendencies. That was a little concerning. That on top of the general bad writing in the show just makes it a little hard to sit through sometimes. But at least this ship did eventually set sail, 6 seasons later, but still. But sometimes it feels like the writers just refuse to actually put them together, even though they keep teasing them, which is another major frustration of mine. Coincidentally, Nintendo released a statement insisting that Mario and Princess Peach are just friends. I'm not entirely sure what these writers have against romance. Is it really that big of a deal if they're official? So I really don't understand it when a show will go out of its way to insist that 2 characters should be together, only to not put them together. Like, for example, there's a cartoon called Generator Rex, and for the record, this is not the only time I'm going to talk about this show. It ended up having most of the tropes I really don't care for. But anyway, there are 2 characters called Dr. Holiday and Agent 6. One is a scientist and a workaholic, and the other is a former mercenary turned federal agent and a workaholic. And the show constantly teases about coupling them up. And roughly midway through season 2, they do go on a date, or at least they tell us they're going to go on a date.
We could go get some dinner. Yes, like a date.
Except nothing comes from this, and it's never brought up again. What happened? Did the date not go well? Then a few episodes later, Six loses a few years of his memories, reverting him back to his mercenary days, and one of the first things he does is hit on Holiday. But even though it's established that they both clearly like each other, nothing ever comes from it. There's just all this setup, but they never follow through. And this isn't the only couple, or non-couple I guess, that I have a problem with on this show. Rex's love life is terrible. There are times where a narrative will insist that 2 characters have to be together, which is something that happens in this show, where Rex has a designated love interest in a girl named Cersei, except in my opinion they don't really have any chemistry and the whole thing comes off as very forced. She pretty much spends the entire show either being indifferent to him or humoring him, and pretty much from the beginning she told him to get lost, but he can't take a hint. So he wears her down until she eventually hangs out with him, only to discover that she's working for Van Cleis, his archenemy. Like Rex, she's an Evo, but you can't tell unless she's actually using her powers. I think this could have been a cool enemies to lovers story, if the whole thing weren't so forced. So we get all this one-sided pining, and it's pretty bad.
Do you have a girlfriend?
Well, it's complicated. She's in league with an evil dictator who wants me dead.
Keep in mind the last time we saw her, she knocked him out, threw him in a cell, told him to join them or suffer, and then left without saying a word when the villains predictably lost. But he keeps going on how she's his dream girl and she's breaking his heart. Anyway, in the first half of the series, she's very loyal to Van Cleis, despite the fact that he's very clearly an evil piece of work, and even goes as far as threatening to torture her. But she just goes on about Evo kind and how he took her in when no one else would, and they're her only real family, even though it's blatantly obvious that he's only using her for his own means and he's a megalomaniac. I think it would have helped if we actually got to see her circumstances when she met Van Cleis, instead of them just vaguely alluding to it. A problem I have with the entire pack, to be fair. They're just not as fleshed out as I would like them to be. But anyway, Rex gives her multiple outs to free herself from the pack, but she rejects all of them, and even when she does finally accept the fact that Van Cleis sucks, she still refuses refuses to join Providence, instead going off to Hong Kong to be with Rex's old gang, although it kind of feels like they just don't want to add her to the main cast. Kind of like when Mona Lisa moved to Earth in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reboot from 2012 on Nickelodeon. Instead of just staying with the Turtles, she stays with the Mighty Mutanimals, basically so they don't have to actually use her that much. But if that's the case, then why did she move to Earth anyway? She was already just popping in sometimes. I'm just saying. So Cersei ends up in Hong Kong, and the next time Rex sees her, she totally ices him out. The whole gang does, really. And it just comes off as so awkward, especially since he's trying to warn them about a direct threat from the pack. But they just kind of blow him off, and make it pretty clear that they didn't want him there, and he assumes that they're all dating each other, which they do act like they're dating, only to then insist that they're just platonic. Not exactly giving us a lot to root for here. Everything about their relationship is so forced and awkward. Even their big moment that's supposed to solidify their relationship totally falls flat. In season 3, they're being hunted down for being Evos, and Cersei ends up sacrificing herself so Rex can get to safety. They kiss and it goes in slow motion, and then he gives this big speech about how you make sacrifices for the people you love, and it's so hokey. But the problem with this scene is that Rex can fly and very easily carry her. He could have just flown away and then the two of them can make out when they get to safety. Now it looks like she'd rather be arrested than be with him. She literally spends the rest of season 3 in a cell wearing a Hannibal Lecter mask. They couldn't have just both escaped. Why? They really don't want to add her to the cast, huh? I could go on, but it's just really frustrating how nothing is able to progress in their relationships, whether it's Holiday or Six or Rex and Cersei, especially since I think those two just don't have any chemistry. Plus, I think that he just had better options that they refused to explore. Something that tends to happen more often than I would like in these shows, where they'll introduce a character who has more chemistry and is more interesting than the endgame ship. Like, for example, the other female member of the pack, Breach, which kinda came out of left field, but she also sacrifices herself for Rex, except it was actually meaningful when she did it. Breach is a four-armed Evo who can open portals. She's also basically a reference to a bunch of horror properties, like Silent Hill or Donnie Darko. Anyway, her role in the story is basically to be a Deus Ex Machina for the villains. As soon as it looks like they're finally going to capture Van Cleis and bring him in, Breach shows up at the last minute to rescue him. They even call this out in the show.
Why so happy? Is this the part where Breach shows up and rescues you?
Initially, Rex wants nothing to do with her because she's creepy and sent him to Silent Hill that one time. But that starts to change when Van Cleis has a plan to travel through time to rewrite history in his own image. And to do that, he straps a device onto Breach that will allow her to open portals through time instead of just space. In an attempt to stop this from happening, Providence decides to recruit Breach, except they want to do it by force, which Rex takes issue with, insisting that if she joins them willingly. He then goes, "I can fix her," and takes it upon himself to convince her to switch sides. Rex finds her basically being tortured by Van Cleis, who's trying to open a portal through time regardless of what kind of damage it's doing to Breach herself. So Rex approaches her and gets her to reflect on the situation, that Van Cleis is really only using her as a means to an end, regardless of how much she's sacrificing for him. So when Rex offers her a way out, she takes it. This is likely the first chance she's ever had to actually get away from the pack. She has questions, but that's understandable, and the two of them spend the whole episode together trying to find common ground. And it gets to the point where she is finally willing to join Providence, but then White Knight ruins it by attacking her, insisting that it's taking too long for her to come willingly, so he's just going to force her, thanks to pressure from the higher-ups. On top of that, Van Cleis tailed them there, so now it's a battle between Providence and Van Cleis to try to get Breach, with Rex being the only one who actually bothers to care about Breach's personal well-being, since despite Providence technically being the good guys, they do still only use Rex. Providence doesn't even pay him for what he does, so he knows what it's like to just be seen as a tool and a weapon. So when she's ultimately caught between these two powers, he's the one who cares about her autonomy. So we come to the sacrifice. Basically, Van Cleis made it so that she can't use the weapon against him or else she'll suffer the consequences too, as a form of insurance to keep her from betraying him. But when it came down to it and she was given the choice of using it against Rex or Van Cleis, she ultimately used it against Van Cleis, despite knowing the consequences. And the only reason she even had a choice was because Rex gave it to her, putting his trust in her even though they had previously been enemies. But after the day they had shared together, he wanted to prove that he was sincere in wanting to help her. And even though he's a part of Providence, he doesn't want to use her like they do, but that she deserves to live free and make her own choices. And in this moment, she's not only sacrificing herself for Rex, but she's also taking back autonomy from her abuser. It's honestly a very powerful moment for her character. Things escalate from here, where the bomb surrounds the two of them. To be honest, Rex has the chance to get out of here, as Breach is the one with the bomb strapped to her, but instead he tells Six to get everyone out of the area, and then he stays with her, and it ends up engulfing him too. And at this point they fully believe that they're going to die from this, but Rex stayed anyway even though he didn't have to. Obviously they don't die, otherwise there wouldn't be a show, but still, I can't even think of most canon couples who went this far for each other, and honestly, their friendship is very sweet, and it would have been cool to see this go somewhere. But instead, Breach only appears twice in the third season. After the bomb went off, Rex was teleported 6 months into the future. Meanwhile, Breach basically gets torn apart and thrown through time, becoming this time anomaly, but Rex is able to restore her true form. He then gets really shy seeing her again, asking if they're still friends, but then she just portals away, and we don't see her again until literally the 11th hour of the series finale, where they basically undo all of her character's progress. So long story short, Rex is able to cure the world of all the Evos. However, while the cure is taking place, Breach pops in and ends up rescuing the pack, teleporting them off-world so they won't be affected by Rex's cure. This includes Van Cleis, the guy who mentally and physically abused her. I really don't see how this makes sense for the narrative itself, other than the writers forcing her back into her role of rescuing the pack, even now when the series is ending.
Now this would be the part where Breach shows up.
They were always hoping for a season 4, and it is nice that we did get a definitive finale for the show, even if it's not what the creators actually wanted, but it feels like they were at least trying to keep this part of it open-ended, so if they were ever able to make another season, they could have the pack and Van Cleis come in again. Regardless of what this meant for Breach's character, which I can't help but be really disappointed by, we never got to see her grow more as a character, or team up to fight with Rex, or see where their relationship could have gone, even if they just stay friends, because let's be honest, I don't think they would have ever entertained the idea of her actually ending up with Rex romantically, which is fine, but it still would have been cool to see them actually hang out and be friends. It was just all this setup with very little payoff and then ultimately setting her back to where she started. Thanks, writers. Just had to revert back to the status quo, with Breach going back to being a Deus Ex Machina in character form, and Rex with his one true love, Cersei. Okay then. Well, that's enough about Generator Rex. Why don't we actually move on with the rest of the tropes? The next cliche I want to complain about is forced drama. Basically, when there's an obvious solution to the problem but they won't take it just to drag out the drama as long as possible. To be fair, this isn't only a problem with romantic plots, but plots in general. Like a misunderstanding where a character will overhear part of a conversation, get the wrong idea, and then spend the rest of the story being upset about it, even though they could just have a conversation to clear things up, which is something that's very common in romance movies. One example of there being an obvious solution to all this forced drama comes from Angel's Friends. In a nutshell, this show is basically, what if the angel and the devil on your shoulder fell in love? The main character is a girl named Raph, who is studying to become a guardian angel. She, along with the other angels and devils at the school, have multiple powers, and one of those powers is being able to read minds. Unfortunately, she just doesn't use it all that much, which is very inconvenient because it would be really useful. A lot of pretty crazy stuff happens. Her love interest Sulfus gets kidnapped, a lot of mind control, Sulfus gets replaced by a doppelganger, conspiracy theories to take down the school, and so on and so forth. And Raph just kinda gets jerked around by the narrative, and falls for a lot of the traps that were set up for her. Even though if she read people's minds, she could get ahead of the bad guys and use that information to her advantage. But instead they just drag things out, and have her complain about how everyone's acting weird, or things don't make sense, even though she has a solution to this problem. Like at the beginning of season 2, she and Sulfus agree to meet, but then he gets mind controlled and flies away from her before they can even talk, and she just lets him go. She doesn't try to follow him or read his mind to find out what he's thinking, but that would be too convenient because then she would know that he's being mind controlled. Instead, let's just have the characters not communicate and fumble around for a whole season, because that's satisfying storytelling. So much of this was unnecessary, but I digress. My next issue comes from when writers act really petty, and I have two examples of this that really got under my skin. Although we can lump Marvel into this category too, considering all the stuff they pull with Spidey. Thanks, Marvel. But my first example is from a Disney Channel sitcom called Liv and Maddie, a show about twin girls who are polar opposites. One being preppy and an actress, Liv, and the other being sporty and a tomboy, Maddie. So my issue comes from Maddie's love life. Her main love interest is this guy named Diggy. His full name is Diggy Small. Smalls, which I feel like is just a reference to the rapper Biggie Smalls, but I'm just gonna move on from that point. The two of them honestly have a pretty volatile relationship throughout the first 3 seasons, having some pretty big communication issues and different goals in life. They actually break up multiple times throughout the show and then do a will they won't they if they'll get back together, with Maddie wanting to focus on sports and Diggy wanting to focus on traveling abroad. He actually signs up twice for a study abroad program without running it by her first, despite the fact that long distance really doesn't work for them, and he doesn't even give her proper time to process the second trip, pretty much springing it on her, resulting in them having a huge fight and breaking up again. They also go out of their way to try to hurt each other. Back when they were together, they bought tickets to a music festival, and then when they broke up, that music festival happened, but instead of trying to find the best possible solution to this in a way that wouldn't be awkward, they go to the music festival with people that the other one hates, in an attempt to make the other angry and jealous. Yeah, these two just don't work together. But then Diggy admits that he still has feelings for her, pretty much as soon as he's leaving for Australia. Again, not giving her any time to process any of this, resulting in more overdramatic shenanigans, ultimately deciding to end things instead of trying to make it work long distance while he's away, but saying they're still good friends and that they're willing to give it another try when he comes back. But for now, they're officially broken up. So while he's away, she ends up meeting another boy named Josh, and ultimately starting a relationship with him, and these two work way better together, having much stronger chemistry, and they pretty quickly became fan favorites. But then somebody takes a picture with them together and Diggy ends up seeing it, and when he sees that she's in an actually happy relationship, he gets jealous and decides to come home early, and tries to convince her to leave Josh and be with him again, even though by leaving the foreign exchange program early, he would now have to repeat senior year. She turns him down, insisting that she's happy with Josh, but he just can't let it go, and unfortunately, neither can the writers. They basically force a love triangle, and even had an interactive poll with fans by having a vote on Twitter, asking fans who they want Maddie to end up with, Josh or Diggy, which they made an event out of, playing the results alongside the big reveal. Josh very handedly won the vote, with over 60%, but everybody watching got to see her end up with Diggy. Yeah, it turns out Josh was just a disposable love interest, and the writers had no intention of actually making them endgame, despite how invested the fans were in their relationship. Then to add insult to injury, they have dialogue in the show that sounds like they're openly mocking the fans.
Maddie is pushing Diggy away because she thinks it's what the universe wants, but it's not what she wants.
I'm glad somebody else sees it.
I'm on Team Miggy. The world doesn't get a vote.
Universe.
Whatever. Clearly they're idiots.
The fact they specifically use the term vote, when that's literally what they had the fans do on Twitter, and saying things like they don't get a say and they're all idiots, it just seems like they knew fans wouldn't be happy with how things turned out, but they didn't care, and were being really petty about it. This was a major rug pull. It was just such an odd thing to do, but I guess they were more concerned with views than actually making their viewers happy. Thanks, Disney. The second example comes from Avatar: The Last Airbender, a very popular and beloved Nickelodeon series. However, there was a pretty notorious incident that happened back in 2008 at San Diego Comic-Con, which despite being so long ago still haunts the fandom to this day. But at least this one wasn't baked into the show like in Liv and Maddie, so that has to count for something. So in Avatar, Aang has a crush on Katara. It's pretty much love at first sight for him, and he spends the whole series pining for her, and they do have some very cute moments together, and they end up being endgame. However, a large portion of the fandom ended up shipping Katara with Zuko, and even today there's a lot of people who insist they should have been endgame. And honestly, after seeing the show multiple times, I do think Katara and Zuko have a lot of organic chemistry, and it's not hard to see why this ship is so popular. However, the series creators Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko did not agree, actually finding the whole thing to be pretty offensive to them. So they put together this special presentation for their appearance at San Diego Comic-Con. In it, they took fan art that had been sent to them by fans, many of it being very ship-heavy, and ultimately used it to mock said fans. Kind of like in Liv and Maddie, they said that everybody was stupid for not agreeing with them, and they said that people who shipped Zutara were destined for bad relationships.
Women who think that Zuko and Katara should be together will forever have doomed relationships.
At the time this divided the fandom, a lot of people who shipped Katara with Aang, or just didn't care about shipping that much, saw this as either a joke or even a way to legitimize their ship in the fan wars. So either something that wasn't to be taken too seriously, or ship war fodder. However, people who ship Zutara, or again were non-shippers, found the whole thing to be very distasteful, and nowadays this incident is largely looked back on as pretty mean-spirited and petty, which I personally agree with. Even if you do think Zutara is an annoying ship, it was so unprofessional, and this just isn't the way to talk to your fans. And the fact that they used fan art that people had sent them out of admiration and respect for their series, that was pretty low. And they actually lost quite a few fans because of this. So yeah, I really don't care for when writers do this. The final point of contention I want to talk about is cheating. First of all, I just think cheating is a terrible and immoral thing to do, and not something that stories should trivialize, but it also ends up being a mark against a character, especially if we're supposed to like and root for that character afterwards. Like for example, in the show Scrubs, JD, the main character, is in love with another intern named Elliot. She ends up cheating on her boyfriend Sean with him, and then officially breaking things off with Sean, which she should have done to begin with, instead of cheating. But to add insult to injury, JD ends up leaving her anyway, so I couldn't help but feel like what's even the point of them getting together to begin with? I mean, they do eventually get back together, and even get married, but I really can't root for this couple anymore. I much prefer the way they did things in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. In that show, two detectives, Jake Peralta and Amy Santiago, start out as rivals at the precinct, but then they develop feelings for each other, even though they're both seeing other people. However, instead of actively cheating with each other, they make their feelings known and then ultimately end up breaking things off with their current relationships. And they go on to have a very endearing romance. And we actually get to see them be a power couple, and it was all pretty satisfying, while also proving that they don't need to resort to immoral means to keep things interesting. But to continue my point, I'm going to return to the Avatar series. In this case, its sequel series, The Legend of Korra. This show takes place 70 years after the original ended, and this series put a larger focus on shipping than the previous one did. Unfortunately, many people, including fans of the show, agree that the shipping was kind of the worst part of it. It pretty much destroyed Mako's character, the main male love interest, and the whole thing was just very frustrating and pretty cringy. So in this series, the new avatar, Korra, has a crush on Mako, a firebender, but he has a crush on Asami, a non-bender, and the two of them start dating, which Korra is very upset about. So she tries confronting him about this, and it goes terribly, and unfortunately things don't improve after this. Quite the opposite, in fact. So while this is going on, Mako's younger brother Bolin has a crush on Korra, and the two of them start hanging out, but on Korra's end, it's pretty obvious that she's just trying to use him to get to Mako, or as a rebound. But either way, it really sucks because Bolin's feelings are genuine, and honestly, in my opinion, she has better chemistry with Bolin. But no, she's thinking of Mako. In the meantime, despite the fact that Mako is with Asami, he is very clearly still thinking about Korra. Like when Bolin brings up dating Korra, Mako assumes that he's talking about for himself, and when Bolin specifies that he wants to date Korra, Mako dismisses it, despite the fact that, again, he is with Asami. But it seems like he just wants Korra to be available, even if he's not actually going to pursue her. Things continue to be weird, ultimately culminating in another awkward moment, where Mako admits to Korra that he does like her, but he still intends on staying with Asami. But then Korra kisses him, and Mako kisses her back despite just saying that he was going to stay with Asami, and also Bolin saw the whole thing. I understand wanting drama to keep things interesting, but not when it's this cringy. Asami eventually finds out about the kiss, and gives Mako a chance to come clean about it, only for him to hide it, which just makes her even more upset and she breaks up with him, which also leaves him to be with Korra. And they do get together officially and are shown dating in season 2, except they're pretty dysfunctional as a couple, constantly fighting and not being on the same page. So glad all that melodrama panned out for the best. Unsurprisingly, they end up breaking up. It's pretty obvious they didn't know what to do with Mako after season 1, but they also have to keep him around because he's the firebender of the group. And unfortunately, his character really suffered because of all of this, and he never recovers from it, just continuing to make faux pas, and then Korra and Asami basically bond over how cringy he can be, and then they end up dating each other. They basically turn Mako into a walking L. And all this melodrama just really bogged the show down. There's a reason why this show is not remembered fondly for its romance. The whole thing was just written poorly in my opinion. It started off on a terrible foot with them cheating, and it just got worse and more awkward from there. So thanks, Sprite. Romance Romance was never a strong suit for the Avatar franchise. The last example I want to bring up is from Good Luck Charlie, another Disney Channel show, which features one of the most hated Disney Channel couples basically of all time, mostly because it involves cheating. The show follows a girl called Teddy who makes video diaries for her younger sister Charlie, and Teddy eventually starts dating a boy named Spencer. Things seem to be going well between the two of them, however Charlie does not seem to like Spencer, and unfortunately it turns out the baby was right, because Teddy ends up trying to surprise him only to discover him with another girl. He tries to play it off by claiming this girl is his cousin Skylar, but when Teddy introduces herself claiming that she's happy to meet his cousin, Skylar says that she thought Teddy was his cousin, revealing that he had played both of them, so they both break up with him. Afterwards, we end up getting a repeat of what happened on Liv and Maddie. Teddy meets another boy named Bo, who, like Josh from Liv and Maddie, has way better chemistry with Teddy, and is just overall a much better match for her, only for the show writers to toss him aside because the audience isn't allowed to have nice things. But at least this time it didn't involve a live poll only for the writers to do the exact opposite of what the poll said, and then have the writers openly mock us. So that has to count for something. However, Spencer ends up coming back, and does this whole song and dance about how he's still in love with Teddy, even though he cheated on her. And initially she rejects him, saying that she's with Bo. However, when Bo leaves, she now apparently has no reason to not take him back, despite the fact that he cheated on her. But the show has them be endgame, which needless to say did not go over well with fans. Not that Disney Channel cares. But having her end up with the guy who cheated on her and broke her heart? Come on, Disney. So that's some of the tropes that I can't stand when it comes to shipping. Hope you didn't mind my incessant ranting. Honestly, I could have gone on longer, but I really appreciate you making it to the end. Let me know what romance tropes drives you up a wall. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members: Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Equestron, Norman Sweet Cream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Bam, Lucas Geist, J Draws, Meowsers, Sky, Philip, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Mac B909, Dakari the Professor, Todd McCaffrey, Omni Fair, Cavalcoj, Strider Exile, Phil C, Killer Bomb, Slawa Saporiguez, Entwined Boot 301, Griffin of Might, Frankie Camarillo, Datadyne Executive, Crimson Phantom, Jin the Goblin, Papa Hud 69, The Gengar King, Daunter, G-Rock, and Chaos Jumper. Thank you for the support, and if you want to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and that part's free. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.